It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to SWPS University to a very special debate on China with very special guests. And I would like to introduce the guests one by one so that we know who is here. So first of all, Professor Yasheng Huang, who is Professor of Global Economics and Management at MIT Sloan School. And he is also Epoch Foundation Professor of Global Economics and Management. And he was previously Associate Dean for Global Partnerships at MIT, and before MIT, worked for the University of Michigan and the Harvard Business School. He's the author of 11 books, both in English and Chinese, and also many academic papers. And one of his books, with a very long title in English, has been translated into Polish and has been quite a famous book here in Poland. The English title is The Rise and Fall of the East, How Exams, Autocracy, Stability and Technology Brought China Success and Why They Might Lead to Its Decline. That's a book published in 2023, and it became the very same year the best book of the year by Foreign Affairs magazine. And the book was published by Prześwity Publishing House in Polish with a little bit different title. The title in Polish is Zmierzch Wschodu. It's like the fall of the East, but the subtitle, I think, does justice to the book because it does talk about China becoming a powerful country and a question whether it might fall. It's also important to underline Professor Huang's other activities because he's very active both as a commentator, as an interviewee, and also as an author of numerous articles in American press, holds also as a policy advisor, for example, for the Brookings CSIS on the US-China relations, and something that I consider also very important. He is also very much socially engaged in the areas of education, advisory services for Asian businesses and different AGOs. So, Professor Huang, it's my great pleasure to be welcoming you here in Poland and here at SWPS University. Thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the second guest we have is Professor Bogdan Góralczyk, who I understand that everybody in Poland must know him. He's one of the most renowned China analysts and commentators here, working at the University of Warsaw, professor at the Center for Europe, previously its director, and also formerly both the ambassador of Poland to Thailand, Philippines, Myanmar, but also chief of cabinet of the Polish foreign minister, and even previous to that, a long-term diplomat in Hungary. And Professor Góralczyk is educated as a sinologist, and a lot of his work is on China, but not all of it. He's also doing a lot of research on Hungary and on the European Union. And many of his books published in Polish, 2 of his books published, one already in English. The title is The New Long March, China in Xi Jinping's Era. That was published by Peter Lang this year, 2025. And another book also by the same publishing house in preparation, The Great Renaissance. This is also a book that was first a few years back published in Polish, and now we will have very soon an English language version. And Professor Góralczyk, of course, is also very much present in the Polish media as an analyst, as a commentator, and also as an author of articles. Professor Góralczyk, it's also my great pleasure to be welcoming you here.
Thank you. The introduction was too long, but
sorry about that. Okay, I'll try to make it a bit shorter now. Last but not least, Professor Maciej Gaca, who is also a sinologist, and he is a professor at the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń at the Faculty of Humanities. His research centers around ethno-linguistics of China and Taiwan, and also language and education policy, cultural policy. But Professor Gaca also has a very rich experience as a diplomat, first working as a founder and then director of the Polish Institute in Beijing, and later as Director General of Poland office in Taiwan. So this is where the Chinese and Taiwanese perspectives come together. And he is also a commentator, analyst on China and Taiwan, and also author of many articles and reports in Polish. And Maciej, it's also my great pleasure to be welcoming you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And my name is Marcin Jacoby. I'm head of the Department of Asian Studies and also Dean of Faculty of Humanities at SWPS University. And I'm honored to be leading this discussion. And I will also probably take part. But I think we will concentrate on our three great guests. The formula for today's meeting is us, the three Polish guests and the host, asking Professor Huang questions, and I hope we'll have a nice discussion centering around, of course, China from both historical and contemporary perspective. So, Professor Góralczyk, please take the floor.
I have the eldest time to go to the Confucian tradition of guiding to be the first one. Professor Huang, first of all, we are happy that you are for the first time here in Poland. Maybe not the last one after this short visit. Secondly, what is extremely important, we are very proud that your latest book was published and described by Marcin. It is an important book, and we will discuss and deal with this book mainly during our debate. However, before we get started, I brought with myself another volume of yours from 2008, Oxford University Press, and the title was at that time very funny, because official title of the political regime in China is Socialism with Chinese Characteristics, and you wrote, and I used this book very much, Capitalism with Chinese Characteristics, but it was 2008. So my question for you, Professor Huang, do you subscribe to this title now, and how is capitalism in Xi Jinping's China at this moment?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a tough question to beginning our conversation.
There will be only tough questions today, I'm sorry.
And before I get to that, I also want to mention that when I was in graduate school, we studied the articles and the work by Oskar Lange, who was a Polish intellectual.
Oskar Lange.
Oskar Lange, who wanted to reform the socialism, but without going all the way to capitalism. And to some extent, Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics was an attempt to do the Oskar Lange reforms in China. Right? So I'm not sure that Deng Xiaoping,
was reading.
Yeah, but he was very influential in China, together with people like Yasheng Huang,
exactly,
the Hungarian intellectual. So now we talk about the current period, and that was published in 2008. I do not consider China today as
a capitalist.
And I have a new edition coming out in January 2026 with the title Statism with Chinese Characteristics. So I don't think it is socialism, in the traditional sense of that word, as all of us are familiar with socialism because Poland used to be a centrally planned economy. In that type of economy, you have complete state ownership. Lange's idea was how to use the pricing mechanism without fundamentally changing the ownership, but using the pricing mechanism to affect allocation of resources. China experimented with price reforms, but also a lot of ownership reforms. Foreign ownership was very important. Private sector was very, very important. I think now the way I describe the Chinese system is that it is a state-dominant economy with still substantial private sector elements, but the autonomy of the private sector has greatly reduced, substantially reduced, as compared with 30 years ago, even compared with maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So the state now is in the driver's seat. You still have some market pricing. you still have strong private sector, but the strong private sector is no longer as independent as it was before.
But they say when I was in China, mainland China, in last December, that the new law on private sector, actually the first one, is prepared, but never published.
Yeah.
Do you know anything? Can you elaborate a little bit?
I don't know why they have not published the law, but as you know, that there was a very severe crackdown on the private sector in 2021, 2022. And this is a way to walk back from that crackdown, to try to revive the confidence of the private sector and try to increase the investments by the contributions by the private sector. So the government now is rethinking about their policy, but they are not willing to do the things that I believe are important to do, which is not passing some favorable policies toward the private sector, but really to begin the process of establishing rule of law, transparency, and more about transparency about decision making, and introduce more predictability in the policy and legislation. So even if they publish that law, I don't think the law
will change.
Yeah, so because ultimately the rule of law is really about imposing constraints on the rulers, and then secondarily.
But when you use the term rule of law in Chinese, it is a different story, because if this is not the same.
Sure.
It's ruled by law, and law is imposed by the Communist Party.
Absolutely.
So it's a different story.
Yeah, it's a different story, but I think that that version of it's more ruled by law is no longer sufficient. Maybe it was okay before, in the 1980s, 1990s, when you had more of a stability, right? So think about Cultural Revolution, it was
absolutely
chaotic. So you emerge from that chaotic situation. Yeah, maybe rule by law is okay. But now I think the issue is quite different. The challenges are more substantial than before.
Okay.
Professor Gaca?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It was really inspiring. I have a couple of questions, but
Too many.
Just 3 pages of questions. We're very serious.
We will not allow him.
Maybe those are answers.
no, but maybe with short introduction, because first of all, I mean, your East framework highlights the institutional roots of China's long-term stagnation. Yes, exams, autocracy, stability, technology. And it's an institutionalist model that convincingly shows how homogenization or how homogenizing institutions can secure state durability, but suppress creativity. Yet, when reading your book, I kept thinking of Peter Turchin's theory of secular cycles and structural demographic dynamics. Because Turchin emphasizes that societies enter crisis not simply because of flawed institutions, but because of deeper structural forces, demographic pressure, widening inequality, and above all, the overproduction of elites, right? So, looking at China today, the structural perspective resonates really strongly. So each year, millions of university graduates in China enter the labor market only to face limited opportunities, fueling frustration, underemployment, and political disillusionment, right? And at the same time, the expansion of credentialed elites far outpaces the availability of allied positions, generating intense competition and social stress. So in Turchin's terms, this is classic elite overproduction, a mechanism that destabilizes societies regardless of their institutional design. So question is, how would you respond to the critique that East places too much emphasis on institutions while neglecting these deeper structural drivers also?
So I think that's a very fair question, and definitely China is a very complicated country. It can tolerate different perspectives. But I see China differently from maybe that way of looking at things. I see, that's why I have a title, right? S, stability. I see stability more than crisis. So we can talk about China today, but just the long history of China, I think is more about the ability of the system to maintain itself despite all these incredible forces, demographic challenges, for example. And if you look at the system, the Qing dynasty and Qing dynasty, in my book, I call them 2Q or 2Qs, right? So, and there's just remarkable resemblance. Whereas in between, there have been uprisings, rebellions, Black Death, demographic explosions during the Luan. There was a lot of Luan, right? Yes. So there's invasions from the nomadic tribes, and dynasties fell, but then each time they managed to recreate themselves almost in exactly the same image as before, and sometimes they went even overboard. Qing dynasty, for example, Manchus, that at the beginning they repressed the Chinese, but then they quickly realized, no, we got to be more Chinese than them. Yeah, so it's almost like a more Catholic than the Pope.
The emperors were more Wenren than the real Chinese Wenren.
Yeah, so I see that pattern more in the Chinese history than constant crisis and divisions. So there is a estimate of the time when China was united vis-a-vis the time when it was disunited. So there's the estimates before the 6th century, roughly about 60% time, 70% time was disunited. But after that, it was almost the reverse, right? 60, 70% was united. So, and then look at China under the communist rule, right? The country went through a lot, right? The Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, the Tiananmen. And so this is political shocks. And then if you look at the policy side, the one-child policy was so extreme, right? And now they are paying a price for it. COVID, look at COVID control. And no country implemented
so harsh,
COVID, so harsh, right? So, and yet the regime survived, right? And so I see some. So I'm not going to predict that the system is going to stay stable forever. And there are some, I think there are some interesting dynamics that we can go into later. But I think the overwhelming pattern that I see is stability. That doesn't mean, and here I differ from other China analysts who use that to say that the government has done everything right. My view is that they have done lots of things wrong, but somehow they have this ability to adapt and to stay in power despite. So that's a very different take on Chinese history and Chinese situation today. So that's why I go into things like what are the forces that gave the country such a level of stability.
So we would say that while East, your concept, helps us to understand why China tends towards stability and uniformity. The overproduction of elites explains why that stability eventually breaks. Would you agree with it?
Well, but it is, so if I can use economic analogy, it's a little bit like inflation, recession, right? So when we say break, the way, maybe he and I have a different understanding of that word. The way I think about break is the fall of the Berlin Wall, right, in 1989. Poland transitioning from socialism or communism to capitalism, rather than the fall of a leader. And, so I guess I have a more institutional definition of the break, and rather than just personnel changes or even changes of policies, right? So is economic reform introduced by Deng Xiaoping a break? So I see that more as a policy change rather than as an institutional change. So that's why I emphasize the continuity. So that's why I'm a little bit scared by the Polish title, which is more on the break, twilight than when the book is. So I'm not ruling that out, but what I'm
not
trying to
pronouncing it that it will.
No. Yeah. So what my methodology is, I would presume stability until I'm convinced that the stability is not going to continue. Right. Rather than like some other people who first announced instability, right? Like famously by Gordon Zhang.
Yeah.
Right. So, and there are lots of others who say, oh, this is instability, unstable and chaos and all of that. That's their primary starting point. My primary starting point is exactly the opposite. But I'm not going to say it's going to be totally stable, because I do see elements of instability now.
Let's ask our dean to ask the question.
My turn.
Idly.
Okay, before I ask the question, I really have to say that I really loved the book, and probably you might find it surprising why. I think the two biggest values of The Rise and Fall of the East to me was you really showed that doing thorough research on imperial China, on the Chinese history, brings value to understanding modern China. And there are many people in the world who think that, okay, that was well past, Modern China has nothing to do with that. And this is very painful for sinologists because we know how much of historical China is visible in China today. So this is one thing. And then
China is different kind of animal, and we need to know.
Well, whether we believe in Chinese exceptionalism or not, like Steve Sun underlines that China is not exceptionist at all. It's just a normal country, but there is a continuation. And if we don't understand the roots, it's really difficult to understand what is happening now. So this is one thing. And another thing is you really showed the place for sinologists. There are different definitions of what a sinologist is, but for people who understand the language, understand the culture, there is a place for them in bringing in quality analysis of China. So thank you very much for that.
We share this view. I share this view.
Yeah, and the way you use data is, it's incredible. I mean, that's really solid, academically solid, preparatory background for saying the things that you say in the book. So my question is, because a very important part of the book is when you actually show that the clergy system, the civil examination system, eliminated innovation and promoted people who were conformists, and that the whole system, actually the stability you talked about a second ago, is the value that is considered important, but the cost is that you eliminate innovators. You eliminate
state without society.
Yeah. But my question is, looking at China today, especially the last few years, so there is, of course, a lot of innovation in the private sector. We have DeepSeek, we have a lot of things, but there is also innovation in decisions of party officials. And one example I can give is 20 years ago, they decided to invest hugely in EVs. And that was a gamble. That was really dangerous. And they saw some potential that, many people around the world didn't see at that time. Clearly, there is innovation not only on the level of individuals, but also on the level of the system. So how do you explain that?
Yeah. So let me get to that very quickly, but let me also share my impression of the kind of conversation we're having. I'm extremely happy to have this conversation.
Thank you.
In large part because my experience so far is the kind of conversations I have had, say, in the United States are not deep enough. And
they're not digging in.
They're not digging in. The journalists quickly, ask me about, what is going to happen next year, Chinese GDP, and so I think, Poland being a former communist country, and there's a depth in and respect for historical analysis, and that the former communist country may not be the reason, but that's
that gives us some additional insight into China. You can put out some things we can relate to.
I feel this very deeply, and because I have had a number of conversations with Polish journalists and Polish intellectuals, I think the interest in the book is deeper, even though Polish culture is so different from Chinese culture, but because of some shared institutional characteristics, there's a deeper appreciation for this way of looking at things. In the United States, a lot of the books on China that have become very popular are the books that are making incredible claims, right? So China being the superpower and dominate the United States.
And on the other bookshelf, China collapse.
And then on the other
Tomorrow
side, it is no, next hour.
before the book is published.
So there's very little sort of interest in a factually, historically anchored analysis, which I try to do. And as you know,
proved that you do it perfectly
as
in this book.
every good academic knows, when you anchor your views on history, on facts, on data, usually you don't say things like, oh, China is going to collapse tomorrow, or China is going to dominate the world tomorrow. You have to kind of say things that are maybe considered by a lot of the sort of commentary in the United States as you're hedging the answer. But that's doing...
Well, you just see the complexity.
Yeah, so you're doing good academic work, and because you see the complexity. So this is totally...
Yeah, well, thank you about that.
But I enjoy this kind of a conversation much more than many of them.
So we will start to dig even deeper.
And all the more reason for you to come back to Poland.
So that is my first visit, and hopefully it's not going to be the last one. And so now I get to your question. So you're linking this kind of exam-based culture, and I think I am fairly convinced that in history it has served to stifle the creativity, including political creativity, including intellectual creativity, as well as technological creativity. The question is always, how come we still observe today this burst of scientific and technological progress? I think that's where the issue becomes very interesting. So let me, in my book, I do have a chapter on contemporary science and technology. Yeah. So the way, at least I think about this issue is that, and this is where the complexity comes in. In history, it's a little bit more straightforward. You have Keju, and then you have the rule of the emperor, and then that's kind of the end of that. But in contemporary era, it's much more complex, right? So China definitely has a one-party system, autocracy, but China began to open its economic system, open its university system very early on during the reform process. As a part of the research for this book, and definitely this is something I didn't know before, China began to reach out to the United States on education, on research, before the two countries reestablished their diplomatic relationship.
Oh, I also didn't know that.
Yeah.
So before 79?
In
the 71, 78?
They began to send students to Iran in
78.
In 77.
Exactly.
78.
In
77.
Great Renaissance, in writing about this.
And so if you look at the economic opening, usually we use kind of 81 as the signature year when they passed the joint venture law, maybe 1980.
1979.
So the
Joint venture.
Yeah, the joint venture, 1979. And then the special economic zone.
Exactly.
And so the educational opening happened at the very beginning of the process. And then if you look at some of the high-tech companies in China that became very famous, many of them had intensive collaborations with American companies, with the American financial community. And then if you look at the technologists who developed many of these advanced technologies, many of them were educated abroad. The solar industry took off. The first solar company that began to do this in 2008, it was a student who studied in Australia. His PhD advisor was a scholar on solar energy. And the solar energy itself, it was invented in the United States, scaled in Germany. They imported wholesale.
Further scaled in China.
Further scale, right?
Yeah.
EV, the important thing there is the battery. So one case that I know of, it is not now used in EV, but it is used in the industrial storage, electricity storage. It was a MIT technology. It's called A123. But the United States failed to develop that technology.
Exactly.
But the United States invented that way ahead of China. Way ahead of China. Solar, same thing. Solar was invented, in the first idea was in the 1950s, and then U.S. began the production of the solar panels in the 1970s. President Carter installed solar
on the roof of
the White House.
Yeah.
Reagan took them down.
Yeah.
So essentially, what China did was they took the technologies. By the way, the American politicians say, "Oh, China stole the American technology." Yeah, there's definitely intellectual
At the very beginning.
At the very
really
beginning.
more.
But in 1990s and 2000s, they began to buy these technologies at fair market price. But the prices were low because Americans failed to develop them. So what I think it is still true today, and we can go into some specifics, what China is especially good at is still on the scaling part rather than on the invention part. But I'm not going to trivialize their achievement. This is actually very difficult to scale. And
don't they enter now a new era where actually I'm absolutely I agree completely with what you said, but I feel that now is an era where you have like investment in pure scientific research in China, which is no longer applied. There is a lot of scientific activity happening, which is no longer scaling. It's going well beyond what everybody else has done. So maybe it's another stage.
Yeah, so I'm going to
Yeah,
get
sorry.
to that. But let me finish this part first. But I'm not going to trivialize what they have achieved. It's actually a tremendous achievement. And they are innovations that come from scaling. And in fact, they are innovations that can only come from scaling. For example, process improvements, process innovations. Japanese did a lot of those innovations. Taiwanese did a lot of those innovations. In fact, if you don't scale, you cannot achieve these. So the United States and much of the West, because they didn't scale, they lost these process innovations. So the scaling and the process innovations are closely connected with each other. So now I get to the scientific part of the equation. You're absolutely right that Chinese scientists are publishing and they're producing fundamental research and basic research. But let's keep that in mind that in the chapter of the book, I go into that. In fact, in China, you can argue that scientists in China enjoy more freedom than scientists in the West.
Because of financial system?
Well, so definitely
the science?
Also, the extreme contrast come in two ways. One is that look at what's happening in the United States now, right? Trump is cutting the budget on science and technology. But it didn't start with Trump. The Republicans have always been very, I wouldn't say anti-science, but they are
Suspicious.
They're very suspicious of science.
It's wasteful.
They think it's wasteful,
money
right?
Exactly.
So if you look at the total budget on scientific research, if you control for inflation, it has not really dramatically increased in the United States. Scientific experiments, scientific research costs money. We know that.
Absolutely.
And in the short run, you don't really get payback. So you have to be prepared to spend a lot of money on that. And Chinese government, to their credit, is willing to spend a lot of money. So in terms of financial freedom, in some ways, the Chinese scientists enjoy more financial freedom than American scientists. But there's also another kind of freedom that Chinese scientists enjoy, which is operational freedom. So in the United States now, to do research involving human subjects, you have to go through a very complicated process of review, right? And there are ethical guidelines and
same in the European Union.
Same in Europe is probably even more. Yeah. And so genetic editing, right? That was to actually, so the genetic editing was again invented in the West, but then the practice happened in China, right? Famously in 2018. So yes, autocracy in general is negative on new ideas and all of, but the Chinese state has made what I call carve out for science and technology. And also another thing that is very important to this policy is opening up. So the Chinese universities have, as you all know, because you really interact with
211,
Chinese universities.
985, there are commercial talents and all the programs.
But on the, as you know, on the social side, on the social science side, on the humanities side, the Chinese government has been very, very repressive. I mean, more so now. But on the science side, they encourage you to collaborate, right? So I'm not going to go and say, oh, because these scientific breakthroughs happen in autocracy, and therefore it is the autocracy that has created these achievements. It is actually the openness, and it is the...
It's behind the system.
Well, so, but it could, you can even argue it is because of the system, because the system values technology. So they gave you special license to do that. But the system, in my book, I talk about the system doesn't like lawyers and social science, free-thinking lawyers and social scientists and artists. So they're very controlling. And then if you look at the Chinese research on social science, it is nowhere near, even on China itself, it is nowhere near the world frontier, right? The best social science research is done outside of China rather than inside of China.
Yeah, I understand.
If I may, shortly, briefly, because I have a hypothesis that what you are talking about scale and what you are writing is absolutely correct and right. But I would like to hear your opinion about my hypothesis that there is not only a scientific revolution taking place in China or innovation revolution, because we have another dynamics, the interest of the empire. Yeah. Even during the Cultural Revolution, Hu Wei in Red Guards were outside from the nuclear experiments and so on. Yeah. So now if you have an imagination, a blueprint, strategy, and sources, you can follow up, you can give total freedom to the scientists, with the exception of one, statism, meaning the ruling role of the Communist Party. Yeah. So if you are not engaged in any political activities, you can be free. But I would like to hear your opinion on this. That those are the interests of the empire. Yeah. We need to move on because it is in our
best interest.
Sometimes we will say imperialistic interests.
So I think that intersection between giving lot of freedom to the scientists and then also to maintain control, that formula breaks down when you have a Chinese equivalent of Sakharov, right? And China did have
Fang Lizhi,
right? But look at what happened to him.
Went away.
And so if you're a scientist, once you combine, I mean, the way I think about democracy and academic freedom is, it's actually science. It's science-based, and it's about hypothesis, and it is about debate. It's about formulating conclusions on the basis of facts and things like that. Sometimes democracy fails fantastically. I do these things for sure, right? But in terms of the experimentation and all of that, democracy is closer to a scientific enterprise than autocracy, open-mindedness than autocracy, right? So, and then I think the Chinese, the new generations of the Chinese scientists have learned that you don't become another Fang Lizhi, you don't become Sakharov, you just focus
on your job.
And the government is extremely smart and wise from their perspective in rewarding these people.
Exactly. Like you can do whatever you wish. And we will give you a
high level, very high level, right? So, but I think this is a system that is still good at areas where you have existing areas of excellence. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the truly path-breaking innovations that have occurred in the world in the last 30 years, despite the fact that China has...
They're not coming
1.4. They have not. I mean, let's just be honest about this, right? So, and you look at the nation of Israel. So are Chinese not as smart as Jewish people? I don't.
But it's also a new generation of EVs. It shows that China is doing something which is pioneering.
No, there's no question about that. But if you look at the recent waves of technological advancements and applications to products. I see the EV as more application of the science and technology to the product. A lot of their innovation is about the consumer consumer facing. It's an incredible car to drive, but there's still there's still debates about, for example, the mileage of their battery and how safe their battery technology. There's still debate. I'm not saying that and in the recent test,
Professor Huang, I suppose we are moving forward. What China is doing in space, what China is doing with rare earths, what China is doing in AI, what China will probably pronounce in early October in the next plenary session, because it will be next 5 years plan. I suppose it will be duplication and continuation of Made in China 2025.
Yeah, so I'm not going to disagree with you, but I am going to disagree with you. Let me do it in the following way.
Our viewers are liking it.
Yeah.
This is
When we start to fight.
Yeah.
This is what universities are for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the rare earth, I think I wouldn't cite rare earth as an example. The rare earth is purely about the ability to extract rare earth and process rare earth. Extraction has huge environmental implications and disasters, and the processing of it is extremely costly. And I think if there's no geopolitical complications, mostly the ability of the Chinese to dominate in the rare earth sector is because the human rights and environmental issues
It's not existing.
as taken seriously. It is really because of that.
Like in the pharmaceutical industry.
No, pharmaceutical. I would cite pharmaceutical biotech as qualitatively different from the rare earth. EV, I think, is somewhere in between, because most of it is really application based and rather than truly invent. AI. So if you look at the DeepSeek, we now know for sure that the DeepSeek benefited from the open source model. There are kind of three elements of that company. Two of them are better known than the other. The best known is that they rely on the initial open source model. The second, less known, is that they are using the most advanced chips produced by NVIDIA. Even though that chip supposedly was under export control, but then they...
Another Huang is traveling to Beijing frequently recently.
Absolutely, right? More famous one, yeah. More important.
Well, the richer one maybe.
More rich, let's put it this way.
By far. So his company now is worth trillions of dollars now.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so under export control, NVIDIA devised a chip known as H20 at a lower level. But we know that they are training a lot of their algorithms on H100, the most advanced. So the third aspect, and this is not, proven and all of that, is that they also use the data set by OpenAI. So it's hard for me they have done remarkable things. By the way, let me add the fourth observation, which is that within a month of DeepSeek, Berkeley researchers replicate their model within a month. So this is we're not talking about high technological hurdle.
Breakthrough.
It can be done pretty quickly. And
Clever way
it's
of working
around. And again, if I sound negative, I shouldn't. It is incredibly innovative, working around, and you should give them a lot of credit. But to conclude from that they have invented a completely new model and they have invented AI, I don't want to go there, right? So I think the difficulty now is how do you calibrate your assessment of what China has been able to achieve in a factually correct way, not to repeat, oh, they cannot do anything, but then not to go all the way to say, hey, they're going to dominate. I think, so let me talk about Made in China 2025. It is absolutely true that they have achieved many of the targets they have set forth.
Exactly.
And even in some cases, overachieved the targets. But there's a recent study by a number of economists that shows a number of things. One is that none of the achievements that they have achieved under Made in 2025 has produced any positive effect on the profitability of these companies.
Okay.
So that's one. I think that's even, the second thing is even more concerning, which is that there's no evidence that anything that they have done under Made in China 2025 has translated into an improvement of the productivity. So now I want to come back to your larger point. The way I interpret what China is able to do now is more like the following, which is that lots of these things they're able to do are the result of the economic growth rather than the driver than that growth. Okay? Because you have, government has a lot of money, they put the money down, and the entrepreneurs use these resources to innovate, to produce vehicles and produce new products. But at some point, the market economy logic says that at some point you have to have returns on the investments. If you don't have the returns on the investments, this model is not really sustainable. There's now actually emerging evidence now that the Chinese government itself,
and this is very important for our audience, Professor Huang. This is very important point.
The Chinese government itself has become extremely concerned about the excess production in the EV, in the solar.
Okay.
There's also evidence that the research institutions in China are now reducing their R&D budget. We're not talking about minor research institutions. We're talking about top level research universities. And, the Chinese economy has encountered many, many difficulties. So,
absolutely.
So
some of them structural problems.
There are structural problems, and also these expansions are extremely capital intensive.
Yeah,
costing a lot of money. And in the end, I think, so usually a economy can tolerate this for a period of time, but you cannot tolerate this for a long period of time, because at some point, if you're only burning money rather than earning money,
absolutely,
you no longer have money to burn.
Clear cut message.
Okay,
you got it.
Yeah, interesting. I think now it's next Professor Gaca's turn.
Okay,
go ahead, Maciej.
Thank you so much. I had another question, which is somehow supporting observations from Martin concerning innovation under homogenization. But as I know that our time is limited, maybe I switch it to another field of my interest.
Okay.
In the respect of your book. So, Professor Huang, your East model is historically grounded in China, obviously. But for external validity, we can look at comparative cases where political conformity coexisted with high level of innovation. South Korea, under Park Chung-hee and Cho Do-hwan pursued strong nationalist homogenization around Hangul as a modern identity marker, yet created the conditions for global leadership in electronics and semiconductors. Singapore enforced political conformity but maintained strategic multilingualism, prioritizing English as a language of innovation, while preserving Chinese, Tamil,
Universal.
and Malay. Taiwan, under the late authoritarian KMT, initially harshly enforced Mandarinization at the expenses of Taiwanese Hokkien, Hakka, and indigenous languages. Yet, since the 1990s, it has moved toward pluralism, cultural openness, while simultaneously building one of the world's most advanced, is not the most advanced, semiconductor industries. So my question in respect of what I just introduced is, what, in your view, differentiates these authoritarian but innovative cases from China such that they do not fit your East diagnosis? I mean, which components of East are uniquely path-dependent to China? For example, exam cultures, cognitive narrowing, or party state penetration, versus general features of state capacity.
Yeah. So I really appreciate this line of questioning because it gets to the subtleties and nuances of the book and my thinking on this issue. As I laid out in the first chapter, a framework, which is that a country, a company, an organization, a university succeeds when it balances two things right. One is scale, the other is scope. Right. So I don't think I said in the book that if you are autocracy, you are guaranteed not to be innovative. What I'm saying in the book is that if you are autocracy and you get rid of all the scope conditions, then that's a condition where innovations, creativity do not happen. I think in historical China, that definitely happened. My explanation of contemporary China, and I can extend that analogy to South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore, is that it is much more complicated story because it is autocratic. But as I explained before, it has also opened to the rest of the world even more than some democratic countries have on the economic side, on the educational side, on the financial side. I do have a problem with the explanation that says that they have achieved these things because it is autocracy. That's the view I'm fighting against. By not looking at these other areas of openness. Now let's come to South Korea and to Taiwan. So and Singapore. These economies, politically, yes, they operated under, South Korea military dictatorship and also Taiwan martial law. Right? But on the economic side, these economies and companies actively collaborated with Western companies, with American companies. Hsinchu Industrial Zone.
Yes.
Look at TSMC. It was founded by Morris Young, who previously worked for Texas Institute. Yeah, by the way, graduated from MIT, right? Yeah. And the TSMC also, if my memory serves me correctly, bought the first patent from American company RCA.
Yes. Very nice. We are familiar with Chris Miller's book.
Chris Miller. Yeah.
Here is published as well.
Yeah, so
published. The same series as yours.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good book. And
very good.
And they so I think it's understandable that we focus on the political system because it's such a, overwhelming aspect of China, South Korea, Taiwan. But sometimes we don't pay attention to these details. Hsinchu Industrial Park involved many, many Americans, including people on the design side, right? So Korean Constitution was written by a Harvard political scientist, Professor Emerson. And so that's one thing I want to mention. And the other thing I want to mention is that autocracies and controlled economies tend to fail when they have the absolute control over everything. Soviet Union failed. China under Mao failed. I will argue Poland probably failed.
Economically, it did.
It was a disaster, right? East Germany failed. But the puzzle is the economies succeeded in Taiwan, in South Korea, and in Singapore. So why? Okay, here's a critical difference between East Germany, Poland, China under Mao, and Soviet Union under Brezhnev and people like that. Those economies were export-oriented, connected with the West, exporting to the West and the exchanges. And so exporting is not just about selling products. It is also about information flow. So now Americans like this Christmas tree, but not like the other Christmas tree. So I produce this Christmas tree rather than the other Christmas tree. That decision is a market-driven decision. In a closed economy, how to know which Christmas tree?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
You have a plan. 1,000 Christmas trees need to be produced.
But can we say every one of them, there's no need.
Needs for the notion.
Yeah. So this is how I explain East Asia and why they succeeded. Yes, Park Chung-hee and Jiang Jingguo, and they were powerful leaders, powerful. First of all, I would differentiate between their political system from the Chinese, more soft. But
Still, okay.
let me just finish this one piece. But those dictators never got themselves involved in setting products and prices because they accepted export pricing as the guide. They looked at Japan. They say, oh, car industry. Let's do car industry. They never decided on what industry to focus on through their own infinite wisdom. It is through observation of other economies. China did a lot of that, by the way, as well. And so I do want to be more calibrating when we judge autocracies. There are different kinds of autocracy. There was Soviet autocracy, Maoist autocracy, but then there's also Jiang Jingguo and Park Chung-hee.
Sorry, I was trying to interrupt because what came to my mind is the idea of developmental state by Chalmers Johnson, that this was different kind of capitalism that they elaborated and succeeded in the western part of the world. How do you assess this? Because this is a different story. This is a different kind of capitalism, different approach.
So this is where I think our common background in centrally planned economy and in a communist, to me, is still communist country, but for you, it was in the past. I think that actually is a very critical in terms of evaluating that argument. So the argument there is a different capitalism. I agree. So it's known as a variety of capitalism. But for someone who came from a centrally planned background, it is still capitalism. It is still capitalism.
Absolutely.
So there's a qualitative difference between that type of system and a centrally planned economy here, right? So that lot of that debates are happening among people and students of capitalism. But once you bring the perspective on the centrally planned economic perspective, I think you see things more clearly, right? And let's just be very honest. Let's look at East Germany and West Germany. Let's look at South Korea and North Korea.
This is what you say, statism instead of capitalism.
Yeah, so
this is another story.
So in the end, so I'm not a religious advocate of capitalism. I'm not a
Try to be a Buddhist. Maybe.
Well, okay, but when people say that somehow capitalism has failed, I have a different point of view. Yes, there are different kinds of capitalism, and we should be careful about their successes and the failures. But I wouldn't go back to the centrally planned.
No,
neither would we.
Don't try to raise the issue like that here in Poland. Forget it.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
okay.
We will need to be wrapping up.
Yeah.
So I think we have like 5 or 7 minutes at the most. So you have a question?
I do. I have
a very short question first.
So please do.
Okay. So it's very short.
I'm not sure the answer is going to be short.
I hope it will. Otherwise, Professor Góralczyk will be mad at me. So China is experimenting with a new technological autocracy. And we see it in Xinjiang, we see it over in China. So my question is, will the Chinese society actually accept it? Will it buy a society where there is no personal space because the state knows everything about you and it even knows what you plan to do because of AI, because of the surveillance system, because of powerful tools that the state has that no state in history had before?
Yeah.
Will stability be maintained with such a system?
So I think there's the stability as a result of control, and there's also ingrained stability because of the way that Chinese citizens and population process the world, right? So I think this is my exam part of the book, which is that it has laid down a way of thinking of accepting the power, legitimacy, and the authority of the state. As a
there
first,
is always a point. I mean, you can't just go too far in that. There must be a breaking point.
You can go quite far, right? So what's too far? Well, you can go quite far, but I do believe, as I said very briefly before, there are some interesting dynamics that are happening. I think I agree with you. You can't go too far in the past because there has never been really economic growth and improvement of the welfare of the people. But now China has had, rapid economic growth, globalization, and exposure to different ideas. So the landscape is totally different from the Qing Dynasty and Ming Dynasty and Song Dynasty. So I do believe that some of the pillars of the control are not going to be as effective as before. If you go back to East Germany, right, Stasi, they also knew everything.
Absolutely.
Right?
With surveillance
In the surveillance society.
Analog way, yes. Now you have a technological way. Yeah.
And but I think one of the things about the East Germany was West Germany was so powerful as a counterexample, and a lot of the East Germans knew what was going on in West Germany. China, Taiwan and Hong Kong used to be, but no longer. But that was too small as a counterexample, so it didn't really have that. But I do worry about when the economic growth completely stops.
Okay,
and there's a debate,
point,
whether or not that's going to happen. But I do see some troubles on the horizon, and I think one of the things that we sometimes don't quite appreciate sufficiently is that how much of the economic growth has brought the Chinese Communist Party legitimacy and support and deference. So to me, it is counterintuitive for the government to crack down on the private sector when I see private sector as providing the tax revenue, employment generations, right? So it is actually puzzling that you don't view that as a source of stability and you crack down on them. And, I don't know if the economy continues to struggle, what level of the control that they can still maintain.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Maciej, quickly.
Just short remark on what you said, but what I still see is that there is this light overproduction here playing out on the social level, and some symptoms that showing that there could be a bigger problem, because you have all these things like pumping, lying flat. You have Latin rods, so they capture the retreat from the ambition in the face of block opportunities. Then you have something what you call 方向就业, yes, so reverse employment. So people who are graduates with a PhD, masters, they open food trucks, they go into cafes, online shops. Then you have Nage one, yes. So something what we could translate like involution.
Sure, exactly.
Then you have also 拼房跳槽, so that reflects that how graduates struggle to find stable trajectories. So all these things are new findings, new social phenomena that are happening in the last 3-4 years. And then they show something that
Some different society.
there's a mass, something happening in the society.
Yeah. So I think on this issue, I do want to say I differ sharply with that sort of overproduction of the elite's point of view as a source of crisis. Right. The reason is I don't have a Malthusian view of this. When you have overproduction of the elites, if the elites are able to generate additional economic growth, more technologies, more innovations, the overproduction problem is going to be solved by that process if you allow that process to play out. The problem that I see is that some of the overproduction of the elites is a result of the policies, is a result of the directions of the policies that have stifled economic growth. And that's a human decision rather than a building feature of this historical process. By the way, in South Korea, at one point in time, they also overproduced college graduates. But then as they opened up their economies, South Korean economy today is very innovative. And just look at their cultural production, right? And so then that industry quickly absorbed many of these elites that were produced that at one point were in surplus. So any one-time mismatch, I don't worry. What I do worry is a persistent mismatch between supply and the demand. But that persistence happens if and only if you have the wrong economic policies in place, wrong political policies in place that have stifled the creativity and the expressions. In China today, for example, yes, many people study engineering and all of that, but there are also many people who study humanities. And if you suppress the expressive industry, by definition, you are not going to employ people in that industry. I heard a few years ago from a friend of mine who told me a very interesting observation. She said, and she was educated in America, lived in Shanghai for many, many years. And she said, oh, Yasheng, I think I'm going back to America. I said, and this is like 2018, 2019. I said, why? I mean, what is going on? What has made you think like that? She said, the TV shows in China are no longer interesting.
Yeah, don't worry about organization. Share this view.
I didn't think about this issue then. Looking back, it was incredibly revealing, right? Now it's all about revolution and I mean, how many creative creative talents do you need? By definition, you have overproduction.
Only patriotic.
Only the patriotic shows very much like Soviet Union, right? So
That's correct.
Whereas before, even with autocracy, there was creativity, there was artistic expressions. I've been to some of these art shows. They were like incredible, right?
Absolutely.
So not just, if you look at China, not just, some entrepreneurs are leaving the country. Artists.
Yes.
Artists. Right. Yeah.
Okay. Gentlemen, we have 3 minutes.
Okay.
Professor Góralczyk, we need to be quite brief.
So I'm so happy to have you. I was initiating, maybe I will put the final nail, hopefully not to the coffin. Yeah. Coffin is not available here. To rephrase, maybe I will put a question of $1 million. I will be mild. 1 million Polish zlotys is 1/4 of that.
Okay.
Some 10 years ago, maybe you are familiar, Francis Fukuyama had a debate with Professor Chang Weiwei.
Yeah.
You saw it, maybe you heard about it.
I'm not familiar with the debate, but I'm familiar with the...
But I will tell you in one sentence.
Yeah.
And this was a debate like we have here today.
Yeah.
What is the future of China? What is the future of the West? Who is prevailing? Who is willing? Who is the first? Who is the best? And so on. And finally, Francis Fukuyama raised one term: Emperor Syndrome.
Emperor Syndrome. Okay.
Emperor Syndrome. And I have a question because we have 3 minutes. Do you think that Emperor Syndrome is back in China? And what with Xi Jinping? And in creating it, what is more important, personality of the leader or structural, cultural background, which we discussed so long in our debate here?
So, I mean, a complete definition of the Emperor Syndrome would include the rules of succession. So I would argue North Korea is there, right? But China is not there. I don't think it's going to be there, honestly speaking. So I think, but in terms of power, yes, right? So the personalistic rule and the power of the leader compare with Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin, and even compare with Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin has far more, at least on the surface, far more power. But here's my observation and question. In my book, I said Chinese economy is a bit like South Korea. Chinese politics is a bit like North Korea. I don't think we have had a case in history where the divergence between the economics and politics is so sharp, right? So Jiang Jingguo and Chiang Kai-shek and Park Chung-hee, yes, you have an autocrat, you have, export-oriented economy, but it's not like North Korean political system.
And it was pro-Western. Capitalist, Western, yeah.
And also take on.
Also, in both systems, in Taiwan and in South Korea, there were periodic elections. The provincial election in Taiwan, there was provincial election. National election, there was also some of the opposition candidates in 1970s in South Korea almost got elected. Yeah. But that's just not the case in North Korea, not the case in China at all, right? So I sometimes worry about people lumping all these autocracies together without making distinctions between them. So I think, something has to get, that's my view, right? So when you have a North Korean political system and a South Korean economy, something
sustainable.
I don't think it's sustainable.
But maybe we need another emperor.
Well, so you either have to go on the economic side all the way to North Korea, well, maybe not all the way, but part of the.
But not the same way.
Or politically, you have to move a little bit towards South Korea. I just don't see how this current situation is going to be sustainable. But can I say when and where and how? I have no idea.
We know from Mr. Trump that tomorrow will be another day, and tomorrow's story
another day. Yeah. So
I think it's a good point to finish our discussion. It breaks my heart because I would love to continue it for the next 5 hours. So all the more reason for you to come back to Poland at some point. I would like to thank you very, very much for this very interesting discussion. I hope it will also be interesting for all the people who are watching us. And again, our guest here at SWPS University was Professor Yasheng Huang from MIT, Professor Bogdan Góralczyk from the University of Warsaw, and Professor Maciej Gaca from Nicholas Copernicus University in Torun. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.
And Marcin Jacoby, Dean of the East Asian Studies in this university.
thank you for hosting
us.
Hosting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.